we're going to take a look at changing an equation of a circle to standard form. Now, if you remember, standard form is this. And the reason that we would want to do that is if they asked us to graph the circle. Sketch a graph or graph the equation. So you remember, standard form looks like this. Now, also recall that your center is HK, right? Oops, that looks kind of funny. Your center is HK, and this right here, R, when we take the square root of it, R is the radius of the circle. So as soon as we have those two things, we could draw a pretty good little sketch. In other words, we could do what it asks, is to graph the equation. Now, I'm looking at this equation and I'm saying, you might be saying, how do I know that it's even a circle? Well, you see that the x squared, there's an x squared and a y squared. Well, unless it's an ellipse or a hyperbola, and we're not talking about those, then it's a circle. And so there's no way that we can have a line with an x squared and a y squared, right? We can't even have a line with an x squared. And so we know that this is a circle because of these two things. We have an x squared and a y squared. Okay? So let's take a look at how we're going to get this into standard form so that we can graph it. Standard form, which is this, so that we can graph it. Here we go. We're going to do something that you're, with which you're familiar, I'm sure, from your Algebra 2 or Algebra 1 maybe even, and that we're going to complete the square. And here's what that means. We're going to gather our x terms together. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a spot for the third, the third position for the x little family, and then I'm going to go ahead and, oops, excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and gather my y terms. Oops. Yeah, gather my y terms. So there's minus 3y. And now I'm going to have a spot for the third term there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just say that that's equal to negative a half. Now, if I'm going to add something to the left, I'm going to have to add it to the right. So there are the blue blanks that I'm adding to the right, in the same way I'm adding them to the left. So what we're doing when completing the square is we're actually going to insert a number that wasn't there before. We're not moving it from somewhere else. We're actually grabbing it from out in space and we're putting it onto the equation. And the way we do that is this. For the x terms, we're going to complete the square this way. It's going to be a perfect square trinomial. And the way we find the third term for that perfect square trinomial is that we take half of the middle term, and then we square it. We take half of the middle term and we square it. All right, so let's take half of 8. 4, square it is 16. Now, as soon as I put the 16 there, I want to put the 16 here. Because I've added 16 to the left, I better add 16 to the right. All right, let's go ahead and now take a look at completing the square here. Half of that 3. Now, I would not recommend turning it into a decimal. I would recommend keeping it a fraction. If it's not going to be a nice, neat, if it's not an even number, then you're going to have a fraction to work with, but it's okay. In addition, forget about the negative, right? Because when we square it, the negative won't matter. So just take the number and take half of it. If it's an odd number, just put it over 2, right? Put it over 2. Now, to square it, leave it as a fraction and square the top separately from the bottom, and we'll get a nice a number that we won't need a calculator to figure that out. We can just put the fractions in. All right? Now, again, I'm going to stress, I would recommend leaving it in fraction form, because you'll see how in a minute we can get it back out of fraction form. It'll be really easy to deal with this. So here we go. Now what we're going to do is take the x the trinomial with x's in it, and we're going to go ahead and factor it. Right? We did that. We did this completing the square process so that we could factor it and that these things would match. I'm going to say that again. We did the completing the square process so that we could factor it and these things could match. Why would we want them to match? Well, because then we're going to do this. We're going to consolidate them with a squared, and the only way we can do that is if they match. So here we go. The way I would factor that would be to put a plus here and a plus here. and then that's a 4, and that's a 4. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy the plus here, and let's factor the y terms. Let's factor the y terms. Now, you may be going, okay, goodness, I don't know how to deal with this fraction. Well, it's really easy. First of all, look at the sign here. If there's a plus here, then immediately look to the front, and whatever is sitting there is going to go here and here. Oops, y. So we saw a plus here, right? And we look immediately to the front, and we saw that those are going to be pluses. On the second one, the y terms, we see a plus in the last one, and we're always going to have a plus when we complete the square. But we look at the front sign, and both of them are going to match the front sign. So now, last thing we do is we take the square root of this thing. Well, we know what it came from. It came from 3/2, so that's what it goes back to. See, with the decimal, it's just, I think, a little bit harder because I know how to take the square root of 9 and 4 separately, so that's no big deal. All right, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to leave the right-hand side. I'm going to do something I normally don't do. I'm going to leave the right-hand side all in fractions. I'm going to actually take the 16 and put it over 1, which I never do. But I want to get a common denominator. I want to leave it as an improper fraction because I'm going to be wanting to take the square root in a little bit. So anyway, so I have -1/2. That's going to really just be 2/4, right, times 2 times 2. So that's going to be -2/4. And then we're going to have this times 4 times 4. So this is going to turn into 64/4. And then I have the 9/4. Now, if I combine all those fractions, I have the -2 and the 64 is going to be a 62/4 plus 9/4 is going to be 71/4. All right, now let's go ahead and finish this up. We have x plus 4. We're going to consolidate that with a squared, plus y minus 3/2, consolidate that with a squared, and that's equal to 71/4. Now, if I compare my goal, which was to get it into this form up here, if I compare that with this, isn't it easy to go ahead and take a look at what the center and the radius are? Let's take a look. Let's pull the numbers back off. So for the center, this right here is my HK. However, this should have been a minus, so we know that that 4 would have been -4. So the center is -4, and then 3/2. Now, this 3/2 is really just 1.5, and when we graph it, I probably do want to leave it a decimal, right? So the center is just -4, 1.5. Now, we know that the r squared is this. So what is my radius? Well, it's the square root of that. Well, I don't know what the square root of 71 is, but I do know the square root of 4 is 2. So my radius is that. Because it's an irrational number, I am going to, and I have to graph it, I'm going to go ahead and get the approximation for that. Square root of 71 is 8 point something, 0.2, or 0.4 divided by 2. I get about 4.2. So the radius, I do need an approximation because I'm going to be sketching it. All right, here's what I need. I need the center and my radius, and I'm ready to sketch or graph the equation, which is what they asked me to do. Here we go. I'm going to give myself a quick little coordinate plane here. And again, this is just me sketching it, giving an approximate location. I have a center of -4, and then up 1.5. So there's 2. So there's my center right there. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and put some more tick marks here to show myself the rest of the grid in other directions, because I'm going to need that. All right, so now I'm going to go out 4.2 in every direction. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's about 0.2. 1, 2, 3, 4.2. It's about right there. And then let's see, that's halfway. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4.2. Close to that. And then 1, 2, 3, 4.2. Here is my circle, roughly speaking. Oops, sorry about that. Kind of wavy there. Okay, and let's just double check what we did. Let's just recap what we did. We completed the square. Okay, we completed the square for the x terms. We completed the square for the y terms. We made sure that we did the same thing to the right side that we did to the left. We kept the fractions in fraction form so that we could go back and take the square root easily. I did end up getting an approximate radius so that I could sketch it. Okie doke, thanks for watching.